I know I'm not the only one that feels like this recently, but the internet is kind of boring. Not because it's quiet or slow, because we have endless scrolling and so many different types of people on the internet, but it just somehow feels empty because none of the content seems to land or make an impression anymore. And I don't know if I just had too high expectations of the internet as a ex Tumblr kid, but I found that like a lot of other people are also feeling this way, and it's noted that we can sort of brush this off as nostalgia or aging or cynicism. But when so many people are describing the same type of emptiness, I think it's worth actually asking the question of what changed. Because surely not all of us are just cynical. Maybe a lot of us, but not all of us. Hello, my name's Yasmin, and I'm a yapper who's holding their mic because I can't find my magnet and the jumper's too thick to clip this onto. Be annoyed if you will. I don't know. But yeah, I yap about anything, and today it's about the internet and how boring it is. Because from what I remember, early internet spaces felt unfinished, messy, experimental, personal. Websites were awkward, forums were niche, and I mean like really niche, by the way. Blogs were inconsistent, and yet somehow all of this just made the internet feel more personal. And I've realized it's because people weren't optimizing, but they were exploring. I think the modern day internet, I would describe it as functioning like a marketplace, but the early days of the internet wasn't like that. It functioned more like a university commons room, or a Wednesday night conversation with your friend where you somehow unlock some memory from like 15 years ago or something. I think meaning of the internet used to emerge through participation and not performance like it does nowadays. The internet didn't just evolve, but it also professionalized. And I think this is with the consolidation of platforms such as like LinkedIn, or how monetization became central. And that resulted in visibility becoming more competitive. And I think that's actually shifted expression into content. And content obviously comes with requirements: consistency, clarity, engagement, scalability. What doesn't perform when the internet essentially disappears, and what does perform gets repeated to death. The internet has essentially optimized itself, but I genuinely feel like it's done so at the expense of actual depth and connection. And really and truly, we can just thank the algorithm for this, because algorithms prioritize what keeps people engaged. And that doesn't necessarily mean that it's going to prioritize what feels meaningful or what sustains connection. And the algorithm has essentially subtly worked to reshape the emotional tone, and complex feelings have now been flattened into categories such as relatability, outrage, aspiration, humor. Having nuance on the internet essentially doesn't work in the modern day because ambiguity doesn't retain attention. I think the emotional flattening, or the narrowing range of emotion, has actually led to the boring sameness that we see on the internet nowadays. The same trend beaten to death, nothing done in a unique way or having anyone's own take on things. And it's all because most, I'm not going to say most content creators, but a lot of content creators who are looking to monetize themselves on the internet have just fallen into the psychology of engagement, and that's it. This is from the sameness. I think I experience a lot of the sameness when I'm doom scrolling. Even though I want to tell myself to look away, I somehow can't. But the psychology of scrolling essentially comes from the constant novelty of seeing something new. But constant novelty actually fragments attention, meaning that our brains don't integrate what they consume, but it just samples it instead. That means that everything that we experience passes through our brains without consolidation, without memory and meaning. And essentially, that's what creates the sensation of emptiness. And it's not because nothing is happening, but it's because nothing is being held. We just assume that when we see a style of content that it's going to be the same as the last, so what's the point, right? The internet has essentially now built community without continuity. Early internet communities formed around shared context. That could be forums, message boards, long threads, but modern platforms actually emphasize reach over continuity, meaning that we see people, but we don't really get to grow with them. And I know it sounds like a weird sort of parasocial relationship that I'm asking about here, but it's not really, because I feel like we create connections with almost everything. So If we don't have that connection to a creator and we feel like we don't really relate to them, I'll say loosely, it means the relationships that we form with them become ambient and disposable. Whatever's disposable surely can't have meaning. Without continuity, essentially, the connection that we build with content creators or any type of content that we view becomes shallow. It might mean that even though you're interacting with these things, you still just don't feel connected to it. I think a lot of the way that content is formed nowadays actually has to do with performance fatigue because being online now requires constant self presentation. Whether you're curating tone, managing identity, anticipating response, all of this just works towards performance fatigue, and people are visible but not fully present. It's kind of, I would say it's kind of to do with the internet now becoming a large part of people's jobs. You put on a different face for when you go to work. Your 9 to 5 face is not the same as your 5 to 9 face, for example. If you're someone that work is going to be shared on the internet, like a lot of content creators are, I think it makes sense why they work so hard to curate themselves. But it also just means that they're performing without presence. And that's just emptiness, in my opinion, even when it is successful. It's like a rise in content creators kind of complaining about the emptiness that their followers might be feeling, and some followers are even like blaming themselves for this feeling. They might assume that they're ungrateful, bored, or disconnected, but really and truly, emptiness is a predictive outcome of overexposure, underintegration, and constant evaluation. The internet hasn't essentially become empty because people have changed. It's become empty because the conditions of the internet itself has changed. And I think it's fair to say that there's been a lot of attempts to try and counter this void. That might be something through nostalgia cycles, the touch grass discourse, or the analog life discourse, offline hobbies, aesthetic subcultures. I think it's easy to look at these things as trends, but I would more so view them as a response to depletion. People are searching for texture, for friction, for something that pushes back, for something that stimulates them. Personally enjoyed finding like a lot of new content creators to watch on YouTube. You know, people with video essays, different opinions, different styles of communicating. I think it's all nice, and it's just, I'm so glad it's not rage bait. Like, I'm so fed up of seeing rage bait on the internet. I think for me personally, the internet is definitely boring because I'm just not taking anything in. But maybe I ought to instead ask myself what kind of digital environment produces emptiness as a side effect. And I think for me that just means that I'm not connected to the right side of the internet, or the side of the internet that stimulates me or helps me feel like I'm part of a community. So I think I've come to the conclusion that emptiness is a rational response to endless stimulation without depth. And that's essentially what the internet is right now. But that was just thoughts I had, you know? Like I said, I'll yap about anything, and I was just bored of the internet, so there we go. I think that's all I've got for this one. I will find something else to yap about as I do. But yeah, that's all I've got, and I'll see you on the next one.